Snow drifted in slow, wandering spirals across the wide, silent prairie. The night they knocked on Elias Crow's door. Inside the ranch house, he sat alone at a small wooden table, one boot propped on the rung of a chair, the lantern trembling against the draft. Nights were always long for him, but winter nights felt endless. Hours stretching like old scars, all bone-deep quiet in memories he never asked to keep. He had grown used to his solitude, to the way the house echoed with nothing but wind and the creak of aging boards. He believed silence was safer. Grief had taught him that. Then came a knock. Soft, timid, barely there. He lifted his head, the sound so fragile he thought he imagined it. But then a child's voice, thin, shaking, pressed through the cold. "Sir, my daddy died today. Can we sleep in your barn tonight?" For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to stop. Elias stood, and with each step toward the door, something ancient in his chest stirred, like a door he'd nailed shut long ago was beginning to unfasten itself. He opened it slowly. 3 figures stood huddled together, snow whitening their hair and shoulders. A young girl, maybe 9, stood in front, chin trembling with effort as she tried to be brave. Behind her, a woman, mid-30s perhaps, clutched a small boy in her arms. She looked exhausted, rain mixed with tears streaking her cheeks. Shame lived in the way she avoided his eyes. "My name's Junie," the girl whispered. "This is my mama, Mara, and my brother Caleb. We walked from Cedar Ridge." Her voice broke a little. "Please, just the barn. We won't bother nobody." Elias looked at them, really looked. The frostbitten fingers, the thin clothes soaked through, the way Mara swayed on her feet, as if she might collapse with one more breath. Caleb's cheek was pressed against her collarbone, small hands buried in her hair. "You're not sleeping in a barn." His voice surprised even himself, low, steady, almost gentle. He stepped aside, letting the lantern light spill out to soften the hard edges of the night. Mara hesitated, her breath catching as if kindness was something she wasn't sure how to hold anymore. Junie took the first step, pulling her mama forward. Inside, warmth wrapped around them. The boy let out a small sigh as Mara lowered him onto a quilt Elias fetched from a trunk. He didn't ask the 1,000 questions burning in his chest. Why they'd been walking alone, who had died, who had failed them. He simply handed Mara a cup of warm water and watched her fingers shake as she drank. By dawn, he had already decided to take them into town for supplies. It wasn't charity, he told himself, just necessity. Children needed food, shoes, blankets. That was all. But when the wagon rolled into town and gossip began cracking through the air like dry twigs underfoot, Elias felt something sharp twist inside him. Clara Briggs, owner of the mercantile and queen of whispered cruelties, crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes at Mara. "Well now," she said loud enough for half the street to hear, "Elias Crow finally brings company? And a widow at that. Didn't know he was taquine in strays." Mara's face flushed a painful shade. She lowered her gaze, fingers tightening around Caleb's shoulder. Junie leaned subtly behind her mother, trying to disappear. Elias felt every muscle in his body harden. He moved a step closer, standing between Clara's stare and Mara's shrinking form. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The look he gave Clara spoke plainly. Enough. The gossip continued in hushed corners as they shopped, but Mara pretended not to hear it. Pretended so hard her shoulders locked in place. Elias watched everything. The way she always counted coins twice, embarrassed to owe him. The way Junie pressed her lips tight whenever someone stared. The way Caleb clung to Mara like she was his entire world. Back at the ranch, Mara insisted on working. "Please," she murmured, her eyes down. "We'll earn our keep." Before Elias could object, she was already at the stove, preparing a simple broth, washing their clothes, tending to the fire. Her movements were efficient but shaky, as though she feared one misplaced gesture would get them thrown out. Elias found himself setting wood by the door, so she wouldn't have to go into the cold, heating water in the mornings before she woke, mending Junie's torn coat late at night when no one was looking. Junie began slipping into the barn, curious but polite, always asking permission before petting the horses. One afternoon, Elias found her brushing his old mare, Willow, with the gentleness of someone twice her age. He showed her how to do it properly, guiding her hand once, then stepping back, letting her grow comfortable in her own time. Mara watched from the kitchen window, her face softened by something tender, something aching. Her eyes glimmered with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, as if moments of safety felt foreign on her skin. Caleb followed Elias everywhere with big, wondering eyes. One morning, Elias placed a handful of grain in the boy's little palm and guided him toward the chickens. Caleb laughed, an unguarded, ringing sound, and something inside Elias cracked open just a little more. Mara's cooking brought back memories Elias had buried. Cinnamon biscuits his mother once made, the smell of warm bread on winter mornings. It startled him, how easily those memories surfaced with Mara humming softly in the kitchen. At night, when the house settled into quiet again, Elias sat on the porch and let the cold air sting his thoughts awake. He didn't know what to do with the feeling growing in his chest, a feeling he hadn't invited. The house no longer echoed like an empty well. The faint laughter of children, the sound of Mara telling Junie stories by lantern light, the soft shuffle of footsteps, all of it made the walls feel alive again. He could feel himself changing, despite every wall he'd built. But fear sat heavy beside him. Love had taken too much from him in the past. Loss had carved him hollow. Letting people in was a risk he didn't know how to handle. One night, he heard Mara through the thin wood walls. She was soothing Caleb after a nightmare, her voice low and steady, threaded with a strength born of heartbreak. "It's all right, baby," she whispered. "Mama's here." Elias closed his eyes as her voice wrapped around him like warm cloth. He felt it deep, something shifting, unfurling slowly, painfully, beautifully. He almost knocked on her door. Almost. But he didn't. He wasn't ready to name what he felt. The next morning, the wind carried whispers from town. Whispers that Mara's story wasn't as simple as a death in the family. Clara Briggs had been stirring darker suspicions, muttering about debts and danger. Elias didn't know what was coming. Not yet. But as he watched storm clouds gather over the horizon, he felt the air change, felt the way silence sometimes tightens before life shifts direction. Something or someone was coming, and it meant trouble. Junie was the first to see the rider. Evening had fallen into that soft, violet hour when the sky held its breath and the world felt thin, like paper ready to tear. She'd been in the barn loft stringing dried flowers above Willow's stall when she froze, her small silhouette framed against the window. "Mama," her voice wavered. "Someone's coming." Mara stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. The moment she saw the shape approaching, the tilt of the hat, the swagger in the saddle, her breath left her in a broken gasp. Color drained from her face so quickly even the wind seemed to pause. "No, not him," she whispered. Elias emerged behind her, sensing something was wrong in the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her eyes filled with dread instead of fear. "Who is he?" Mara swallowed hard, voice barely audible. "Rafe Ellison, my husband's brother." Those 3 words carried the weight of years she hadn't spoken about, secrets she'd held tight like a shield. Elias said nothing, but the storm inside him was already rising. Rafe dismounted before the porch steps, boots hitting the ground with a thud that felt like a threat in itself. His grin was sharp, sour, too confident for a man carrying the smell of whiskey and old trouble. Well, he drawled, eyes locking on Mara. "I finally found you." Junie scrambled down the porch steps and pressed herself against her mother. Caleb hid behind Elias's leg, tiny fists clutching his trousers. Rafe's grin widened. "You run off with the kids, Mara? That ain't how family works." Elias moved a step forward, placing himself between them without thinking. "State your business." Rafe sneered. "Family business. Not yours." Mara trembled. "Rafe, please. Just go." But Rafe wasn't listening. Not to her fear, not to the children, not to the cold gathering around them. He never had. He looked at her like she was property he'd misplaced. "You come back with me now," he said, voice tightening. or I'll make sure every soul in town knows what really happened to my brother." Mara's knees nearly buckled. Elias saw it all, the terror, the shame, the memory lighting her eyes like a bruise. "Tell me," Elias murmured gently, not looking away from Rafe. "What happened?" Mara's voice cracked open like a dry leaf. "He killed him," she whispered. "He pushed my husband off the ridge. Called it a drunken fall. He told me if I ever said a word, he'd come for the children next." For a moment, everything went silent, the kind of silence right before lightning strikes. Elias's jaw tightened. The veins in his forearms stood out. And Rafe laughed. A raw, ugly sound. "Believe whatever you want," Rafe spat. "But she's coming with me." Then he stepped forward. Elias moved faster than Rafe expected, planting himself solidly in front of Mara, voice quiet but carved from stone. "No one is taking them." Rafe's expression twisted. "You got no claim on him." "Don't need one," Elias said. "They asked for shelter. I gave it. They stay until they choose to leave." The air thickened. Clouds swallowed the fading light. A cold wind flicked dust into spirals at their feet. Then Rafe reached for Mara. Elias grabbed his wrist, not violently, not with fury, but with absolute finality. Rafe jerked his arm back and swung. The first blow caught Elias across the jaw. Junie screamed, Caleb began to sob, and Mara stumbled backward as the fight erupted like the sky had split open. Thunder cracked. Rain began falling in sharp, stinging sheets. Elias didn't fight like a man fueled by rage. He fought like someone protecting a fire he couldn't let go out. Rafe was wild, swinging fists, cursing, slipping in the mud. Elias was steady, anchored, every movement quiet and controlled. Rafe tackled him, shoving him into the ground. Mud splashed. The horses in the corral kicked their stalls in panic. Elias shoved them off, breath ragged. Rafe lunged again, catching Elias's shirt, ripping the fabric. Elias staggered but didn't fall. Mara cried out, torn between shielding the children and rushing to help. Lightning lit the world white. Rain hammered the earth. In the heart of that storm, Elias Crow finally let out the voice he'd been holding back for years. "You don't get to hurt them anymore." He drove Rafe back, step by step, until Rafe slipped in the mud and landed hard on his back. Elias stood over him, chest heaving, soaked to the bone. Rafe spat mud, fury burning in his eyes. "This ain't over." "Oh, it is," Elias said. He leaned down, just enough for Rafe to hear the steel in his voice. "If you come back here, you'll answer to the law. The sheriff's going to hear everything." Rafe scrambled up, clutching his pride like a torn coat. He mounted his horse, glared down at Elias, then at Mara, and disappeared into the storm, hooves fading into the thunder. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mara fell to her knees, rain and tears mixing on her face. Her breath came in shaking currents, her hands trembling as if the past years were finally breaking loose from her spine. Elias crouched beside her, not touching, not forcing comfort, just close, steady, present. "You're safe," he said, voice softer than she'd ever heard. "You and your children, you're safe now." She bowed her head, sobbing into her palms. No man had ever stood between her and danger before, never like this. The days that followed unfolded like the quiet after a long, violent storm. The ranch seemed to breathe easier. Mara moved with less fear in her steps. Junie began humming again while sweeping the porch. Caleb slept through the night without crying. One evening, Elias found Junie placing a small, carved wooden horse beside Caleb's pillow. She confessed the old one had broken. Elias spent nights carving a new one, smoothing every edge with gentle care. When Mara discovered the toy the next morning, her hand flew to her mouth, and tears collected at the edges of her eyes. Something warm, slow, and tender was growing in the space between them. Nothing spoken, nothing rushed. Just gestures, just presence, just quiet grace. But Mara had been hurt by too many promises, and Elias had been wounded by too much silence. The fear of overstaying her welcome clung to her like a shadow. So the night the sky softened into gold, she stood at the doorway, bags packed. "Elias," she whispered, We've stayed long enough. Folks will talk. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. At her tired hands, steady now instead of shaking. At the children asleep behind her, their breaths soft, safe. At the life that had bloomed in his once empty house. This house, he said quietly, was hollow before you came. It felt like a memory trying to fade. He touched the doorframe, the wood worn smooth beneath his fingers. If you want, he continued, voice deepening, you can stay. Mara froze. Not as guests, Elias murmured. Not out of pity, but because this place, this home, remembers life now. And so do I. Junie awoke and slipped her hand into Elias's without hesitation. Caleb toddled out, rubbing his eyes, and leaned against Elias's leg like he'd always belonged there. Mara's eyes filled. Her breath hitched. And slowly, like sunrise breaking over cold earth, she stepped across the threshold. Elias whispered, his voice thick with a meaning he didn't have the courage to name until now. Welcome home. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, the lantern glowed warm. Some homes, Mara realized, are not found by searching. They're found by knocking on the right door. And some hearts, wounded, wandering, weary, learn to beat again when someone finally stands up and says, you're safe here. You're wanted here. You're home.